Please be seated. Well, Merry Christmas, everyone. Merry Christmas. I want to share a story of a Christmas memory. And I think that we all have, I hope that we all have Christmas memories that stand out for us. And what I remember is that when I was a kid, our family would gather. My mother would bring my brothers and I and my father, and we would go to her brother, Uncle Jess's house. And Jess and Lorraine, my aunt and uncle, had 3 kids, and we would all pile into basically one room, and most of us were sleeping in sleeping bags on the floor, and it was just such a wonderful, exciting time. And of course, that night before Christmas, the kids are all lying there whispering to each other well into the night. It seemed like we would never fall asleep. It just was so, it was too exciting, right? And it was just too exciting to even consider actually sleeping. And it was kind of wonderful. This was in a small, older neighborhood in Fresno, California. And on one side of the block was Uncle Jess's house, and on the opposite side of that same block is where Uncle Tim and Aunt Jeannie lived. And so all the family was there, and then it was just a mile or so away that Grandma Jenny was. And then there was the extended family that if you were here last night, that I talked about, and that we would all gather with. And the extended family was huge with Grandma Sally, my great-grandmother, who literally rode a horse into town to get, supplies and things like this. She was a farmer's wife and a farmer's daughter, and Grandma Sally was the matriarch of a clan. She had last night I said she had 3 daughters and a son, but I actually forgot my Aunt Maxine. So oops, sorry, Maxine. God rest your soul. It was Bonnie and Alma and Marie and Maxine and Mac. And Maxine was a card. She joined a monastery. She became a nun at the age of 15. And then, at the age of 50, she decided she was done with that and came out, and this was the weird, really strange aunt that nobody could quite figure out. She was very interesting. But it was just so much fun to gather with all the family together. And I remember the year when the whole family gathered at Jess's house. It would rotate from house to house each year. And one year it was at Jess's house, and we had already put, the Christmas tree was up, and we had put our gifts under the tree, and all the rest of the family arrived. And I don't even know how we fit that many people in that little house, but we did. And that was the time when I just remember that the living room, it wasn't big enough. It wasn't big enough for all the gifts even that people brought and put down around the tree. You could just barely get into the room, and so there were people there was like a family room on one side and a living room and then a dining room on the other side, and we were just all in the adjoining rooms, and there was someone whose job it was to go into that pile of gifts and find the tag and get it to the right person, and it was a joyous chaos. And that's a wonderful image of family and gathering and fun and love. And that's what we hope for at Christmas. That's why we can sing songs like it's the most wonderful time of the year, because we do get together for things like that. And then we sing this hymn that we opened up with today about Jesus being born in a cattle shed. Right? The hymn really helps me with this point, because, it takes that image of Jesus, and with Mary and Joseph, they came and the inn, there was no room at the inn, it says in our translation, in our English translation. And instead they were given space with the animals. And in later centuries, this whole notion of a creche was actually invented by St. Francis. And St. Francis decided to help tell the story of Christmas by enacting the scene with the shepherds and Joseph and Mary and the manger. And he created the first creche, that first scene it was like a tableau kind of a thing, right? So that people could see. People who were illiterate, perhaps, and couldn't read the Bible for themselves could experience the story, right? And so he interpreted the story in a way that made sense for that culture that St. Francis lived in, St. Francis of Assisi. And they kept their cattle in sheds. And so there we are. We have our cattle in a shed, and that's where we relegate Mary and Joseph. But would that really have happened? I mean, Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem because of the census. They all had to go and be counted. And Joseph was of David's family by way of Jesse, and therefore he needed to go to Bethlehem to be counted. So he went to Bethlehem, and he went to the Motel 6, and there were no rooms available, right? No, because there were no Motel 6s in Bethlehem at the time. There probably still aren't, right? I hope not, anyway. I haven't been there, but you've been there. There's no Motel 6, right? What they would have done is they would have gone to his family home, right? To his relatives' home. And when he got there, he would have found that, as the people coming from maybe the furthest away and getting there as late as they did, the guest room was already full. That room, that word that we hear in the reading this morning, it says, there was no place for them in the inn, it says. That's the word, the inn, right? But the actual Greek word is kataluma. Can you say that? Kataluma. Kataluma. That's the Greek word. And here's the interesting thing. If you jump forward to chapter 22 of Luke, what you find is that this is where Jesus is sending the disciples into Jerusalem to prepare for the Passover feast, for the Last Supper is what it's going to turn out to be. And he says, where is it? Here we go. He says, go. I need to not read try and read the Greek here. Let me get the English. I took a year of Greek, but it didn't stick. Okay. And say to the owners of the house, the teacher asks you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs already furnished. The guest room. Guess what word that is in the Greek? Kataluma. It's the same word. There was no room in the guest room, and so they put him in the other room that they had, which is the room downstairs where the animals were. And why were the animals inside? Because they were the most valuable thing that those people had, and they needed to be protected at night and kept out of the cold and kept from being stolen, and so they brought them inside. That's how it was done. This is just standard operating procedure. The other thing that is standard operating procedure in the Middle East is hospitality. Oh my gosh, the value placed on hospitality is such a glorious and beautiful thing. I remember we had an Iranian neighbor, and I went and visited one day just to say hello, and I had no idea what to expect. They brought me in and they started giving me food, and it was just their sense of hospitality to the neighbor and to the stranger is just overwhelming to our Western sensibilities. And so let's reimagine this story just a little bit. Let's reimagine the story that Jesus is born not in a cattle shed, but in the other room. The guest room was full, but they're still surrounded by family, just like that kids' room upstairs at Uncle Jess's house with people laughing and talking into the night and parents telling the kids to be quiet so that everyone else can get their sleep. And in the morning, people getting up and sharing a meal together. That's the setting that Jesus is born into. It's a setting of love and relationship. Now, the other things about that story are also true. It is also true that it is a modest, it is a meager beginning, right? He is not born in a castle. He is not born in a palace. He is not led, the way isn't prepared for him by armies or whatever, right? No, it's a very humble beginning. It's a humble beginning nested in love. That's where our Christian story begins. That's where the incarnation is found. The incarnation, the presence of God revealed in another human being, is found in that love that surrounded them there in the only space that was left by the time they got there to Bethlehem. And that's what we seek to do. That's what we try to do and be as followers of Jesus today. We try to be an expression of that love of God that is experienced and revealed in relationship. Last night at the earlier service, at the 4 o'clock service, we had one of our guests, and she's become a frequent flyer. She's been here a lot lately. The police brought her here first on Wednesday because it was so cold, and we had the severe weather shelter open that night, and we work with the City of Shoreline and NUSA, the North Urban Human Services Association, and Lake City Partners to run a shelter here. And she had been brought by the police, and she's been sort of hanging out ever since. On Christmas Eve afternoon, when the musicians showed up in order to begin rehearsing for the later services, she was sleeping in front of the door, like they literally couldn't get the door open because she was there. And Chris was here, and Chris asked her, we need you to move just a little bit. It's an automatic door. It's going to whack you if you stay there. Maybe you could move just a little bit. And Chris made macaroni and cheese for her because she was hungry by that point in the day. She'd been there since the shelter closed the night before. And then we took her to, there's a 24/7 community, there's a shelter over on 130th that we took her to, the Bitter Lake shelter that was open last night. And so she had a place to stay. And that, seeing the image of Christ in everyone and allowing the love and compassion and generosity of God to be expressed through us, that is the spirit of Christmas. That is what we are called to as Christians in the world today. Christ was born all those years ago, and God became incarnate in Christ. And Christ continues to be born in each person. That image of God is revealed in each of us. And we share that and celebrate that at Christmas time.